All right, welcome back. So for the next part of the project, in the pattern, it recommends sewing the body seams and the side seams of the sleeve and then fitting the sleeve in. But personally, I find it easier to sew the sleeve cap in first and then to do the body seams. The sleeve cap is, to me, it's a harder seam because there's so many different angles to address. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sew in my sleeve first. So I've got my sweater laying, I've got the front and the back of the sweater laying here. Here's the seam that I just finished along the shoulder, and I've taken one of my sleeves and I'm finding the center of the sleeve. So at the top of your sleeve cap, you remember you did some decreases along here. And so if you want to find the very center, you can kind of fold your sleeve cap in half and line up those decreases along the edge. I've got a number of locking stitch markers here. So I'll just put a locking stitch marker in like this to mark the very center of the sleeve cap. And I'm going to lock that to the seam that I just made because I want the center of my sleeve to fit into, to be aligned with the top of the shoulder. And then I'm going to take let's move this over here. Here we're following down the edge of the sleeve on the front of my sweater, and I'm following along with my eye the edge of the sleeve that goes like this. And so you have this little bind off tab on your sleeve seam, and you have a little bind off tab at your armhole here. And so I'm going to line those up like this so that they're sitting next to each other. And I'm going to put a locking stitch marker on the edge of where I bound off for the armhole on both the front of my sweater and on the sleeve cap. And then here, where that little curve lines up, that little dip in there, I'm going to put another stitch marker right there. Okay, and then I'm going to eyeball the rest of it. Do you see here? It will fit in there, but it looks a little odd right now. So I'm just going to kind of pinch it together in the middle here. And then in the middle of the middle, so here's that halfway point right there. I'm going to pin those two together. And then here, I'll pin these two together. Okay, so you can see there's half of my sleeve fitted into the front of my sweater. Okay, so now I'm going to seam. I'll seam up to the middle, and then I'll use my stitch markers to fit the back half of the sleeve into the back of my sweater. It doesn't matter to me whether I'm starting, working from the back to the front or the front to the back. As long as half the sleeve fits in here nicely, that's all I'm really concerned about. If you want, I can show you on the back as well. Same kind of idea. Here's the center of my sleeve. It's still pinned in there. So I can pin the underarm tabs together because I happen to have a marker for that. And then I'll pin this little underarm tab here. You see that? So there's the flat part of the underarm. I'm going to pin that together where that bind off edge ends. Well, what the heck, why don't I just go and find some more pins here. There we go. Okay. So now I'm lining up. There's the center of my sleeve cap. There's where I've pinned together the armholes. And I'm just going to find the middle of this section. And I'll put a pin in there. And then the middle of that section, put a pin in there. Middle of this section. Okay, got one more pin, so I'll just throw it in. Oh, I don't know, I'll just put it in right here. All right, so now you can kind of see, push it up here a bit. There we go. That's how my sleeve cap is going to fit into the shoulder of my sweater. It's a piece of fabric that's kind of curved a little bit, but now that it's pinned in place, you can kind of see how that's going to go. And I can start up here using my piece of waste yarn. I can sew across here, see how far I can go, and then I'll get another piece of yarn to continue sewing. I like to start at the top of the shoulder and work my way down, so that if there is any kind of easing that has to be, if I'm off a little bit, where I'm off is down underneath my arm rather than on top of my arm. So I like to start at the top of the sweater. And I'm just going to use this, I'm going to start off by using this yarn that is left over from binding off my sweater, and I'm using a wool needle. This is a wool needle that has a little nylon loop at the top of it, and I find it really handy for seaming, but any kind of tapestry needle will work. It doesn't have to be this one. All right, so to do this, you're just going to thread your needle and then position your sewing. So I probably should have told you too that notice that I have the right side facing out. So when we're sewing, we're seaming in knitting, we have the right side facing so that you can see what your seam looks like as you go along. And it's just a really nice, neat way to seam up your garment. I'm going to start here where my tail ends. It's a little bit below the center line of the shoulder, but it's where I have available yarn. So that's where I'm going to begin here. I'm seaming two perpendicular pieces of fabric. So the knitting on my sleeve, the direction of knitting goes this way, and on my shoulder top, the direction of the knitting is going this way. So on this side, the stitches are pointing up like this, and on this side, the stitches are pointing up like this. And so the seaming is to get a nice even seam. On this end, you're going to kind of eyeball it a bit. I guess that's the only real way to describe it. When I do my mattress stitch here, I want to go under my selvage edge about the same distance on both sides. Let me show you how that works, and then it might become clearer as you go along. So here's where my yarn is. Because it's on this side, I'm going to go over here and start over here, and you can see that I didn't keep my selvage edge nice and clean, so I have some purl stitches in there, and that's going to make things a little more challenging, but bear with me. I'm going to find, what I'm looking for is the stitch on the very edge here. So if I put my needle under it, that looks like the edge stitch. So I want to go in one stitch. Remember, we're supposed to have a selvage stitch here. It's easier to see up here. If I unroll my knitting just a little bit here, there's the selvage stitch along the edge. This selvage stitch never looks very pretty. It's not as neat as the stitches next to it. So what I want to do is sew so that the selvage stitch is on the inside, and the next stitch, the second stitch of the row, is nice and neat and showing on the public side. So if this is my edge stitch, I'm going to go into the row between the edge stitch and the next stitch. I'm just going to pull this apart a little bit. There we go. And I'm looking for the little bars that are connecting one stitch to the other. So there's my side stitch, the first stitch of the row. There's the second stitch of the row. And there are the purl bumps on the back side, which we're not really looking at right now because we've got the right side. And I'm going under two of them to get started here. Okay, so I've got that kind of lined up. I've eyeballed it, so that's where I think this needs to go. And on this side, it's a little bit easier because these are all knit stitches coming up here. On this side, I'm just going to go under, I'm going to go under 2 bars of a knit stitch. But I'm going to do something do something a little tailorish. So if I go under these 2 bars, I'm kind of scooping up underneath the entire knit stitch. Let me see here. So I'm going to back up a little bit. There's the knit stitch on the outside. I'm going to go into the center of the knit stitch and come out of the center of the next stitch so that my bars are angling up like this, like a little triangle like that. Okay, and then I come back to this side. Do you see? I'm going to leave the yarn nice and loose here. You see where the yarn is coming out? That's where I went up 2 bars. So I'm going to put my needle right back in exactly the same spot, and I'm going to come up 2 bars worth. Now I've got a purl stitch sitting on top of me here, so you can't really see the bars, but it's about the right amount of distance. Okay, I'll keep this again nice and loose. So I've come under 2 bars over here. Now I'm going to go over to this side, and again I'm going to go down into the center of a stitch. It looks a bit like a balloon here. I'm going to go into the center and come up in the center of the next one. Okay, and I'm just watching that my stitches are even. Come back to this side now because I've got my selvage stitch here. You see how I can just get under 2 bars like that? There's the side stitch, there's the second stitch, and I'm right in between them. Then I come back to this side and I put my needle right down into the balloon that it's coming out of here, and I angle it up and come out 2 stitches later. Okay, and you see how this is just working nice and neatly across the edge here. And everything's lining up nicely. Okay. In through the center, out through the center. Back here, up 2 bars. As long as these stitches are lining up nicely, I don't have to change anything. But if I noticed that they were starting to twist a bit like this, like I was getting, I was covering more distance on this side than on this side, then I could adjust how many stitches I go under. Maybe I only go under 1 stitch on this side. I want to keep those bars that are coming across here nice and horizontal. Okay, I'm going to do 1 more on this side, and I'm getting close to my pin here, and now I'm going to give it a pull. Remember that my yarn was attached to my work here, and so I don't want to end up with a pucker. So I'm going to pinch the end of the yarn here. I don't want to pull too tightly on it, and I'm just going to pull everything like this to create my seam. Okay, you see how nice and neat that is? On the inside, I have a nice neat seam here. Okay, so everything's looking good so far. I'm going to keep going. Now I've hit this pin, so I'm going to take it out, put it to the side, and I'm going to keep going again. Now see my yarn is coming out on this side, and you can kind of see that I've got maybe a touch more fabric on this side than this side. So let's deal with that as we go along. I know where I came out, but where do I go in here? You know, my yarn's kind of disappeared from sight. I can't see it anymore. So I'm going to pull it apart like this, loosen that last stitch up a little bit so I can see where I'm going. If the yarn's coming out this side, it means I have to go back to this side, and I want to put my needle in where this yarn is coming out, just on top of it here. And my seam's going to get in the way a little bit because it's kind of bulky. I can only really get under 1 bar. So I'm going to come up through the seam like this. Try not to split the stitches. Try to go under the stitches and up so that it's really smooth where your needle is going. Okay, and back over to this side, in through 1 balloon, out through the other, then back to this side. Now when you're using the same yarn that you're sewing with, that you knit with, it's hard to see. So there's where my yarn is coming out. Put my needle back in there. I'm going to pop it out right there. Okay, keep these stitches nice and loose. Go back over here, then back over here, go under 2 bars for now. Back over here. Okay, I'm going to eyeball it. So I feel like I have a little more fabric here than I do here. So over on this side, this time I'm just going to go under 1 bar. And then on this side, I'll go under 2. And again, try not to split the fabric, because when you pull on your string, you want it to pull easily. You don't want it to be, catch because you've split the yarn. I'm going to just do 1 bar here again. 2 on this side. And then I'm going to go back to 2s on this side, because again, I don't want to create a pucker over here. And then 2 here. And I'm going to give it a pull. When you go about 1 inch, give it a pull, because you don't, the further you get, the harder it is to tighten up back here. So again, I'm just going to use my thumb to kind of pinch where I last pulled, and I'm going to pull on my yarn until everything just kind of snaps in place. Okay, looks like I didn't pull quite hard enough here, so let me just see if I can ease that in. There you go. See how they just kind of snapped up, and I'm trying to create this nice straight line there. And over here I see that over here it looks like I didn't go as deep into the seam as I did on this side. See that? So if that bothers you and you don't like it, you can back up. There we go. So you might say to me, really, Cynthia, you're going to back up here? Do you really think that's necessary? And so what I'm going to do here, just because I can, I would like to line up this stitch with this stitch. If I hold my needle over it, then to me it looks more equal. Now that's more than 1 selvage stitch on this side, but that's okay. I can have a thicker seam, it's all right. So I'm just going to move my needle in here. Wait, find out where your last stitch was. Okay, I'm going to pull that one out too. Okay, so my last stitch went in here, and now I'm just going to angle over a little bit deeper on this side, then come back over here, go under these 2 bars, back over here, do 2 bars, and then I'm having a look here. Yep, that's lined up nicely. And I'll go under 1 bar again. Two bars. Okay, now I'll give it a pull and see what that looks like. Okay, nice straight line, looks really good across the top here. Everything's lining up nicely. Again, I'm going to do 2 bars on this side, 1 bar on this side for a little bit, just to make sure that it stays nice and even. And that's what we mean by easing in the shoulder seam, where we're just trying to make sure that everything is looking like it fits. So if you have a little more fabric on one side than the other, rather than taking more bars on this side, take fewer bars on that side, or vice versa. Okay, now here I've got a bit of decreasing that's happening along the shoulder cap, and so when I go in, I can't go 2 bars here because there isn't a bar over here. I'm going to have to angle down. So I'm looking at where my last stitch went, where my stitch went in, where my needle went in, where my yarn is coming out of, and go back in that same hole. And this time I'm going to angle down to the next row. I'm going to come out right about here. Back over here to catch up on this side, I'm just going to go under 1 bar this time. I should be doing this in a different colored yarn so you can see it really clearly, but you're probably going to end up with the same thing on your sweater. Okay, so I'm going to back down here. There's my yarn. I'm going to come over like this, and then on this side straight down. Here I don't have any shaping, it's just a straight line, so I'm going to continue going in a straight line. And I'm just changing my mind, I'm going to do 1 bar again rather than 2. Okay, now this might seem fiddly and tedious, but remember, it's the shoulders that they take the most time. Once you are seaming down the side of your sweater, it's a lot faster and easier. When you get to a stitch marker, take it out. And I think I'm safe to go back to 2-2. I'm going to give it a little pull here. See how it looks. Yep, I don't see any warping in the fabric, so I'm going to keep going. Okay, and again, I've got another decrease happening here, so just going to keep angling it over. Okay, so again, your shoulder seam should have some give to it, some elasticity. When you pull it apart, you should have about the same kind of stretch as the rest of your garment. So again, you don't want to, if you pull too tightly, you'll get some puckering. Like here, I pulled on it, and let me show you again. You see how it's puckering like that? I'm going to get a kind of like a puckered shoulder, so I'm going to ease that back out again. Okay, just keep kind of adjusting it as you go so that the seam lays nice and flat. Everything looks nice and neat and tidy, and keep going. I'm getting to the part of the sleeve here where we had the knit one, we did the, I think it was knit two and then the decrease. And so here I want to pick my track again to keep it, because it's going to create a nice even line along here. So I just want to give myself a minute here to think about where I want that line to run. So there's a knit stitch there, there's a knit stitch there, and there's the selvage stitch right along the edge. So sometimes when you pull it apart, you can see it just a little bit better. Knit stitch, knit stitch. I'm going to try to go in right here. Just trying to get under 2 bars. I'm going to give it a little pull here and see what that looks like. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Okay, so I'm going to keep going here. So this is where, blocking, again, washing your garment will reduce the curl on this side here, and it makes it easier to seam because of that. All right, so pretty soon I'm going to run out of yarn. I'll leave that in there for a minute. Pretty soon I'm going to run out of yarn, and when that happens, I'm just going to leave the tail dangling here, and I'm going to just join in a new piece of yarn and keep going. And so there's really no big secret there, but I'll show you what that looks like when I get to that point, okay? So I'm just going to keep seaming here for a bit. You can do the same. And just remember that you want to try and stay in a straight line where possible, and that you want to keep eyeballing the gap between where you're sewing and making sure that your seam is horizontal and kind of catching up on one side if you need to. Okay, you can sort of see with these diamonds here, sometimes it's hard to stay in a straight line, but if you get off, you just pull it back a bit and keep going. I've got one hand underneath my knitted fabric here to kind of keep things going, to support my sewing on the underside. So see how it's kind of at an angle here? It's like I'm higher up on this side than on this side, so maybe I need to only go under 1 bar here and under 2 bars here to catch up, because I want my threads to be horizontal. Give this a pull and make sure I'm maintaining a straight line. Yeah, that looks good. And then I pull on it this way to see if there are any gaps. Like if I got a wide gap here but not here, then I would just pull on it a little bit more. Okay, looks about the same. Like the ditch here in my seam is about the same as the ditches between my stitches on this side. Okay, I think I'll get up to this marker and then I'll change out my yarn. Guess I should have left the marker in there. I'm just kind of unrolling the edge with my finger as I put my needle in. So again, if you're having a hard time doing this and you haven't yet washed your piece, I would definitely recommend giving it a good wash, lay flat to dry, and let those edges relax a bit before carrying on. Okay, I'm going to give it a pull here. I'm just going to have a look before I swap out my yarn, before I've gone too far at kind of what an edge I'm getting here. Yeah, so Nice straight line here, pretty even along the decrease edge here. It, you know, really almost looks like one piece of fabric, doesn't it? Okay, so got to the end of my yarn here. What I'm going to do then is just pull off a new piece of yarn from my ball. Don't make it too long. Because you're sewing with it, and each time you draw the yarn needle through, you are kind of abrading it a little bit. So if you make it really long, then, oops, sorry. If you make it really long, then the edge of it tends to get a little mangled looking. Okay, so I'm just going to leave my old tail dangling out here. I've got about this much further to go. I don't think I'm going to make it with this piece of yarn, so I'm just going to leave that dangling out here. And to join in my new piece, I'm not going to do anything special. I'm just going to say, okay, where would I have gone with my old tail? Well, I would have gone in right on top of where it was last coming out. So I'm going to put my needle in there, and I'm going to go up. Let me see here. I'm going to go up 1 bar because this edge is shorter than this one again. And I'm going to leave a tail dangling out here that I will weave in later, and then I go back over to this side, up 2 bars. Okay, then back to this side. I'm just going to do 1 bar again. And then over here, 2 bars. Back to 2 bars on this side. And then 2. Again, I'm just going to do 1 on this side because I want to try and ease in that little bit of extra fabric on this side. Okay. And I've gone about 1.5 inches, so I'm going to give it a pull here, and I'm just going to hold on to these tails so that they don't pull all the way through. Okay, keep going. I want these 2 flat edges to kind of come together, so I'm going to just go under 1 bar on this side, 2 bars on this side. Okay, and then these flat edges here, give it a little pull. Okay, home stretch. Okay, I'll give it another pull here. There we go. And here too, like if I felt like this seam was too thin, because I have the yarn still sticking out of this side, I can actually pull on this yarn to tighten it up. So because it's too far away from this end to tighten up anything here, but this tail that's handy here for me can also be used. All right, now I'm going to leave this long tail on this side because I'll probably use it for seaming up the underside of the sleeve or down the body side. And I'll return back up here, and I'm going to attach a new piece of yarn here and seam down the other side of my sweater, just like I did on this side. All right, I'll come back when I've got that done. All right, so we have seamed the shoulder seams. We've sewn in the sleeves, or I've sewn in the sleeves. I'm hoping you've done that along with me. As you can see, I've got several ends to weave in. But before I do that, I'm going to tackle the seams on the side of the body and on the underarms, on the sleeves themselves. This part is a lot simpler. So here I am at the base of the armhole, and the technique is exactly the same. Before you start seaming, let me just get some of these yarns out of the way here. Before you start seaming, it's a good idea to line up the areas of your sweater that have that are natural joining places. So I'm here at the underarm of the sleeve, and I'm pinning that area together like that. And then I'll go to the cuff of the sleeve, and insert a little pin right here. So where the ribbing comes together, I'm going to put a pin in there. And then you just need pins to keep everything even as you're seaming. So at about the halfway point of my sleeve, I'll put in another pin. And then in the halfway point between the pins, I'll put in another pin. And you can see I'm unrolling the edge of the sleeve here, but it really doesn't matter. You're going to unroll it as you seam anyway. So the edges can be kind of folded over when you pin them. Here's another pin in the midway point of the sleeve. And then you can do the same thing on the sides if you have enough pins, or you can just do one segment at a time. But here on the sides, I'm just going to make sure that I line up. There's those purl stitches on either side of the front, so I want to make sure that I put a pin in there to keep those aligned. And then down here at the base where the ribbing is, I'll put another pin in there. And then in the midway point between your pins, slip in another pin. And if you don't have enough locking stitch markers for something like this, you can always do a segment, free up your locking stitch markers, put some, put those freed up ones further down the line, and away you go. So these seams on the side are a lot easier to do because, generally speaking, they're just a lot straighter. Since I have a lot of excess yarn right here at the armpit, what I'm going to do is use it up. So I'll use one of these to seam this way down the sleeve, and I'll use this one to seam this way down the side of the sweater. So let me just show you a little bit of seaming on either side, so get the hang of it, and then you can do it yourself in case you haven't done this before. What we're talking about here is mattress stitch. And so to mattress stitch, what you're going to do is spread out the sweater so that, again, the right sides are facing you. You're going to try and make sure that your components, any sort of pattern components, stripes, that sort of thing, that they're lined up so that when you go to do your seaming, they're in alignment. And so I've got a little bit of a tail hanging right here, so I'm just going to start right here, and I'm actually going to take a pin out of my sleeve so that I can slip my hand in underneath here and stabilize the fabric from underneath. Okay, so I want to make sure that I line up these purl. I'm going to take this one out too. Just get my strands of yarn organized. Okay. So I want to line up these purl ridges here. And so what I'm going to do, and the yarn that I'm going to use is coming from the left side of my seam. Okay, so I'm going to work on the right side of the seam first. And what I'm doing here is I'm picking my edge stitch. Remember we talked about this before. There's the edge stitch, and it's really hard to see the edge stitch because it's uneven, and it likes to curl under here. So sometimes the best thing to do is to find a stitch, like the next stitch in, and then look at what's beside it. Okay, bring your eye up, following that, and again, it's a little bit harder to see in these purl stitch edges. So I think I'm right about here. I'm just going to put my yarn under one bar just to get it anchored up at the top here. Okay, and then I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going through 2 bars, but not quite into that purl ridge yet. So over on this side, it appears to be a lot closer to the purl edge. So I'm going to go into the purl edge on this side and down 1 bar. And I want to match that on this side, into the purl ridge on this side, down 1 bar. And then I'm going to go under the purl ridge on this side, down 1 bar. Looks like there's really only 1 bar on this side, so I'm just going to leave it like that. Into the purl ridge on this side, down 1 bar. Let's go a couple more stitches in this direction. Okay, and then give it a pull and see if let's see if I've got it lined up. It's not quite perfect there. I kind of think I'm going to leave it because it's right under the arm, but you know, if you didn't like it and you thought it wasn't, you know, quite good enough, you can just unzip that and line it up a little bit better. Oh well, you know, why not? Okay, so this bar here is lower down than this one. So I need to start a little further up. At the beginning. Let's just try this again. Okay. So because I have more fabric here, why don't I just toss that end aside and use this end instead? Because this way I can come over here and I can go under 2 bars on this side. And I'm just going to backtrack on myself a bit and just go under 1 bar here. So I'm just joining those 2 edges together. Okay, and now I'm going to go under 1, 2 bars on this side. So I'm going under the purl bump and the next bar. And on this side, I'm going under the purl bump and the next bar. And then on this side, I'm going under a bar and then under the purl bump. And on this side, I'm going under a bar and a purl bump. Okay, let's keep going. Down a few more stitches. I'm going to go a little bit further this time because I'm not pulling that one back. It's under the arm, but let's just see if I did a better job this time. Well, you know, that's not bad, is it? And so a good start, it's probably a good idea to go back and make a good start of it, because again, I would like these pattern elements to line up as well. And in here, you know, it would be nice to have this little bit of the pattern motif line up also. So let's keep going and see how that works out. So you're just taking your yarn, going back and forth, so from side to side under 2 bars of the stitch, 2 bars of the 2 rows. That. Okay, let's give it a pull here before get into that. I'm just checking that my tension is good. Yeah, I love seaming, especially in stockinette stitch, because it just looks so seamless. So again, you want to pull your seam so that when you pull on the stitches this way, the amount of space for your seam is about the same as the stitches on either side. Okay, here we go. All right, so you're lacing up your sweater, right side's facing out, going, I like to go 2 bars, some people go 1 bar, no more than 2, because otherwise you'll get a bunchy seam. And I like the option of doing 2 because then I can cut it back to 1 if I find that it's sort of uneven. But as long as you're carrying on and getting to your marker at the same point on each side, you're doing pretty well. Got like a little thick bunch of stitches there. And again, you're going under the stitches, not through them. Otherwise, when you go to pull your yarn, you just won't be able to pull it. Good. Okay, keep going.